The Gospel for today comes from Matthew, the 22nd chapter. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap Jesus in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere, and teach the way of God in accordance with the truth, and show deference to no one. For you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then Jesus said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. The Gospel of the Lord. Who do you belong to? It's really the question of the gospel today. Who do you belong to? Now, in the story that we hear of Jesus, and it's in the Holy Week, it's right before they are finalizing their plans and their efforts to kill him, and they're trying to trap him. Because the question they're asking is, should we pay taxes or not? They know that if he says that they should pay taxes, that the people that he's been around who are anti the Roman emperor are going to be upset because they are trying to be free of the Roman Empire. And on the other hand, if he says don't pay taxes, then the Romans will turn against him and kill him because he's plotting some kind of insurrection. So they basically presented him with a lose-lose situation. And by they, I mean two groups that were basically diametrically opposed. On the one hand, you had the Pharisees, who were against Roman rule and were trying to retain whatever power they had in Israel, and the Herodians, who had basically co-opted with the Romans and were working with them. But both sides knew that Jesus was a threat to them. And because Jesus was a threat to them, they wanted to get rid of him. And by posing a question like this, they thought they could do it without dirtying their hands. They would either have the people turn against him, or else the Romans turn on him and kill him. But Jesus was smarter than that. And he wasn't going to get entrapped in an either-or situation where people were so diametrically opposed. Instead, he had them show them a coin. And the coin had an inscription of Caesar on it. Now, that meant for the Pharisees that it was an inscription of a person that would be in opposition to the idea that you are not to make a graven image of anything. And so just by having the coin, it was basically against with a picture of someone on it, was just basically against Judaic law. But he looks at it and he says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." And so he was able to avoid making a decision and put it back on them, but I think more importantly, he was raising for us a way to navigate life when there are diametrically opposed sides, when people are struggling, and when we are really having difficulty trying to figure out where we fit in this world. To remember that our number one part of who we are and what we're created to be is to give to God what is God's. And the image on the coin was Caesar. But we are made in the image of God. In other words, he was saying, give yourself to God. And when you give yourself to God, in doing that, you find your way forward in a divided, in a fractious world. Now, at worship at Emmanuel today, we are having a service of healing in conjunction with this text. And It's an odd sort of text, you might think, about being a text for a healing service. The reason we're having it is we're also celebrating St. Luke, because St. Luke was the physician. But I really think that this text is about finding healing for us as people and for our nation and our world in the midst of division. Because it is a call to remind us that we are made in the image of God, and when we give to God ourselves, our whole being, that's where we find healing. As we serve and heed God, and when we focus on following that and loving others and being faithful, in the midst of all of the craziness of the world, we can find healing. You know, the slaves, when they created the spirituals, I think understood this. Because they literally were owned by someone else. They were possessed by another human being. But they knew that their souls belonged to God, that they were not owned in spirit. Their bodies could be owned, but their spirits belonged to God, and so they created these songs, these call and response songs that they used in the fields to renew their spirit and to remind them that their spirit is centered in God, and in that they were able to find peace and strength in the most horrific of situations. And those spirituals still today remind us that God truly is the Lord of our spirit, and someone can take our body, but they can't take our soul. See, we find healing in our life when we recognize that the fractious things of the world cannot take us away from a God who embraces us and loves us. When we give to God ourself, our love and our spirit, and that becomes our focus. You know, it's kind of ironic that our coins say, "In God we trust," because so many people place their trust in that, in money. I think somehow that is what is going to define them, or they hold on to it tightly. And when they do that, when we believe that, then it causes us to get off center, to lose our focus, because money doesn't save us. One of the joys of tithing, one of the joys of deliberately and intentionally giving back 10% of what you have to God, is that it frees us to understand that everything is God's. Everything belongs to God, and we find healing when we are able to see that and understand that and order our lives in that. That's trusting in God. That's actually following what's on our money and putting it into our heart. And in that, we find healing. And we hold on to stuff and things tightly and believe somehow that will heal us, that will make us whole. Well, there'll never be enough, because you're always going to be stuffing something into that God-sized hole, and until it is a recognition and an awareness that you belong to God, until that happens, well, then your restless soul will continue to be restless. As St. Augustine said, our souls are restless until we rest in God, and that is understanding that we belong to God. All of the things of the world seek to tear us apart, but we find our center and we find our wholeness in that awareness that as we give ourselves to God in service and praise and giving and time, we get back our whole selves. The Herodians and the Pharisees, well, they were trying to distract from a message that gives us purpose and mission going forward. So in the midst of anxiety and pain, we can turn to God with our whole selves and know that as we are made in the image of God, we are healed in the image of God. And we find wholeness. Not necessarily miracles, but a miracle to continue living in a broken world. There was an inscription that was found in a Nazi concentration camp. It was written on the wall in a cellar, in a concentration camp, and I really think it lifts up that understanding of finding our center in God and finding a belief that goes beyond ourselves. It says, I believe in the sun even when it's not shining, and I believe in love even when there's no one there, and I believe in God even when God is silent. I believe through any trial there is always a way. But sometimes in the suffering and hopeless despair, my heart cries for shelter to know someone's there. But a voice rises within me saying, hold on, my child, I'll give you strength. I'll give you hope, just a little while. I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when there's no one there. I believe in God even when God is silent. I believe through any trial, there's always a way. May there someday be sunshine. May there someday be happiness. May there someday be love. May there someday be peace. Those were written, words written in a place of utter despair, recognizing that even in the midst of that, there was hope. That comes from understanding and knowing that we have a God who created us in God's image. Because of that, we are able to give ourselves to God. And finding that gives us healing. It gives us hope. It gives us promise. So in the midst of a world that seeks to tear us apart, in the midst of struggle, remember who you belong to and whose you are. Because when we know that, we know whose we are, we find healing, we find hope, and we find a way in a weary world. Amen.